Alrighty, g'day everybody, it's the Doga! Just want to say happy Australia Day to all the Aussie viewers watching this video first up straight away. So, today's video is something a little different. This is partially inspired by Peter from the Lizard King channel, who does these particular types of videos. Basically, he gives the idea ranking their favourite songs from his favourite albums. In this situation, we'll be doing that today for an iconic Australian band from back in the day that are still going to this day, but pretty much no longer the same band that recorded all of the albums that we'll be showing off today. So this is going to be The Angels, aka Angel City, all their studio albums from 1977 to 1998. Pretty much all the albums featuring Doc Neeson. We won't go any further than that. Any of the recordings made beyond 2011 we'll not even worry about. Thank you very much. So, let's start with their debut album from 1977, The Angels, as it's simply titled. This album, there are some pretty decent songs on their first album. It's a bit hard to pick a favourite. I've been going on and on for a while to decide which one is the best, and I'd probably have to go... probably the penultimate track on side 2, Hot Lucy. Bit of an oddity, it's a kind of early mid-70s boogie feel to it. Definitely shows the Angels were heading in the right direction towards rock and roll, but at the same time, the first album didn't seem to sell that very well. And yet, I've got probably 6 or 7 copies of vinyl. Be sure to check my showcase videos on the channel where I show those off. Either way, we then move into the big guns with 1978's Face to Face album. Pretty much all of their biggest hits came from this particular album. Songs like I Ain't the One, Coming Down, Marseille, Take a Long Line, which I'm probably going to pick that one as my favourite from the album, Take a Long Line. I mean, pretty much any Australian would know it from its brilliant riff and Doc Neeson's brilliant intro making the declaration, "This is it folks, over the top." Arguably their best album for me, and arguably that's my favourite song from that album. Now we move into 1979's No Exit. Again, this is probably their next best album from this period. Probably the Angels their best until they ended up leaving Albert Productions in 1980. There's a lot of good songs in this one, like the title track, Save Me, Mr. Damage, Shadow Boxer. I'd probably have to say that my favourite from this album probably is Mr. Damage, actually. Another one with a brilliant riff, some really awesome lyrics. Probably the most intense song they recorded up to that particular point in their career. Always been very fond of those two albums. Things started to shift in 1980 with their next album, Dark Room. Again, I'm just using CDs because it's a lot easier to show than vinyls. There's a number of good songs in this album. I've always thought this album was a bit, the beginning of the change in the band's sound and songwriting structure. A good few songs in here. I mean, No Secrets is the biggest song of this album. There's a few others on here like Devil's Gate and Night Comes Early and Alexander are also pretty good on this one. There's also, probably my favourite has to be the second track of this album, Poor Baby. I don't know why that particular song wasn't a big hit. I'm guessing everyone just thought No Secrets was more radio friendly, whereas Poor Baby still had more of that really rough Angels sound that they had at the time. And things would change. They would have their first major lineup change in 1981 with Brent Eccles coming in on drums in place of Buzz Bidstrup. And they recorded their fifth album, Night Attack. Again, this is where the band's performances, the recordings started to change a bit with this one. There's some pretty good songs on here. There's the title track, And there's Fashion and Fame and City Out of Control and Living on the Outside. But I'm going to go with the penultimate track to this album, Talk About You. Probably the fastest song they ever did in the studio. And also live as well. Even if the lyrics are a little repetitive, especially the chorus, but it's still probably my favourite from that album. And after bassist Chris Bailey left in 82, 83, they brought in American bass player Jim Hilbun for the 1983 album Watch the Red. This album I always thought was... Jim Hilbun said in an interview years ago that he always called this the quirky Angels album. To me, it's kind of a concept album. It has a number of vastly different arrangements. Like, there's instruments like saxophones and piano, accordion, and guitar player John Brewster on the lead vocals for the song No Sleep in Hell. Again, this album has some good tracks, like the title track is a pretty good one. You've got Eat City and Live Lady Live and Is That You. I'd probably say Is That You is probably my favourite from this album. I think it was the fourth single off the album. It's probably the only one I don't have out of the others. The next album from 1984, 2 Minute Warning, was the first to be recorded outside of Australia. It was recorded mostly in America. About 9 of the 10 tracks on this album were recorded. Let's look at the back. I think it's listed somewhere. The majority of the album was recorded. Yeah, I don't remember. I don't think it's even listed here. Oh, hang on, here it is. Recorded in Los Angeles from May to July of 1984, except for the final track recorded in EMI 301. This album, 2 Minute Warning, probably is their weakest 80s album for me. They tried to get back to their classic sound with this one, but it just didn't work. I think it just didn't have the energy of the previous few albums. You've got some tracks like Underground, Small Price, Between the Eyes. There's also one on here called Razor's Edge, not to be confused with the AC/DC song. But I'd have to say the best one for this album is Run for the Shelter, which is the final track recorded for this album and was the only one recorded here in Australia. I don't know, I think it's because of the fact that it was recorded here and was produced entirely by Rick and John Brewster. It just sounds much better than the rest of the album. The rest of it just doesn't seem to stand up to me. The rest of it just doesn't seem to live up to Run for the Shelter on its own. I reckon that could have worked as a single, but instead it was the B-side of Look the Other Way from that album. Anyway, after John Brewster left the band, she was replaced by Bob Spencer, formerly of Skyhooks and later of Rose Tattoo. And they released their 1986 album Howling. They started to get back a bit closer to what they were doing previously, but again they modernised it for the 80s ears, I guess. Again, there's some really good songs in here. You've got Did You Hurt Somebody, you've got Don't Waste My Time, and a brilliant cover of the Animals' We Gotta Get Out of This Place. But I think my favourite from this would have to be the track that follows that, Standing Over You, as listed here. There's some brilliant songs on that album, but I'd say Standing Over You is probably the best one from that album. It's a shame that never made it to being released as a single. Anyway, after Jim Hilbun left at the end of 1989, he was replaced by another bass player called James Morley, and Beyond Salvation was the next album. This was released in 1990. Again, start of the new decade, and the band is still doing what they do best, you know? This, I believe, was their only number one album. And again, a number of great songs from this album exist. The title track is probably Probably the strongest song on side 2. I mean, there were a number of singles off this album, like Let the Night Roll On, Backstreet Pickup, and Bleeding with the Times. But I have to say, Dogs Are Talking is the best song from this album. It's probably their biggest hit at that particular point. And is probably well known by a lot of Angels fans. It's probably their best 90s hit. And then there was the follow-up to that, 1991's Redback Fever. Probably, I'd have to say, this was a bit of a step back. I mean, I've heard Bob Spencer go on to say that the band were really trying to recapture their old sound, but it wasn't what he wanted, which is why he left the band about a year or so after this. Again, another good title track off this album. It has some pretty good songs, like a version of Ian Hunter's Once Bitten, Twice Shy. And also, probably the best song has to be from that album, Some of That Love. Again, one of their fastest, more energetic songs from that particular period. Don't think it sold very well as a single. I do know it was a single, but I haven't yet located a copy. I think it was only on CD single. I don't think it was released on 7-inch. I don't think they even had vinyl singles anymore by that stage. I mean, that was a good couple of years before I was actually born, so, you know. Anyway, the last album with Doc Neeson, recorded mostly in 1998, as well as some additional recording done 2 years earlier, was Skin and Bone. John Brewster and Jim Hilbun had rejoined the band for this particular album. And they did what they could. I don't think this particular album stood up to the best of what they had before this. And this, as far as I'm concerned, was the best they could do for the time. The production isn't the best. And I'd have to say, there are some reasonable songs on there, like What the Hell and Invisible Man. But I have to say, the big single off the album, Call That Living, is probably my favourite song from that album. It's really hard to choose a song, especially because that was Doc's final album before he eventually had the car accident in 1999 and took an extended sabbatical, and the rest is history, you know. They never really did much after that. They didn't record anything else until 2011, and by that stage, Doc had left the band and was replaced by Screaming Jets vocalist Dave Gleason. And, no, I don't listen to him at all. I'm loyal to the Doc Neeson-fronted Angels. Just putting that out there for everyone to know. Either way, that is it for this video. Be sure to leave a like. And if you're an Angels fan, comment down below what your favourites are from each album, unless you've not heard all the albums. Either way, be sure to subscribe to the Be a Good Dogger YouTube channel for more content. I will try and get as much content as I can out in future. Just I've been rather busy and haven't really had the time to do much as of late. But until next time, this is the Doga saying have a wonderful Australia Day, or any day wherever you are in the world right now, and we shall see you again.